I thought the Firewatch job would be peaceful. Then I found the note hidden under my mattress. Rule number 5. If you see a man in a yellow raincoat, do not wave. He is waiting for your time to run out. Turn off the lights. Let's begin. They say that silence is heavy, but that's not true. Silence is light. It's weightless. It makes you feel like you're floating, untethered from the world. It was the silence that drew me to Blackwood Peak in the first place. After the divorce, after the debt collectors started calling my cell phone 3 times a day, and after the city smog started to feel like it was coating the inside of my lungs with tar, I needed to float. I needed to disappear. When I saw the listing on the Forestry Service website for a fire lookout position, 6 months, total isolation, no internet, and a paycheck that would clear half my debts, I didn't just apply. I begged. The interview was a formality. They checked my pulse, checked my vision, and asked if I had a history of hallucinations or panic attacks. I lied and said no. 2 weeks later, I was throwing a duffel bag into the back of a battered green Jeep driven by a ranger named Holloway. Holloway was a man who looked like he had been carved out of jerky. He didn't talk much during the 4-hour drive up the fire road. He just chewed on a toothpick and watched the tree line with a suspicion that I thought was funny at the time. I don't think it's funny anymore. The Blackwood Fire Tower is a 60-foot steel skeleton rising out of a sea of Douglas firs. The cabin at the top is a 7x7 box of glass and wood wrapped in a narrow catwalk. It is the highest point for 50 miles. When Holloway dropped me off at the base of the stairs, he didn't offer to help me carry my gear up. He just leaned out the window of the Jeep, the engine still idling, ready to bolt. "There's a manual on the desk," Holloway said, his voice sounding like gravel crunching under tires. "Read it. Memorize the topography. Radio checks are at 0800 and 2000 hours. Sharp. If you miss 2 checks, we send a drone. If you miss 3, we send a team. Don't miss the checks." I nodded, shielding my eyes from the sun. "Got it. Anything else I should know? Good fishing spots? Bears?" Holloway hesitated. He looked up at the tower, then back at me. For a second, I thought he was going to tell me to get back in the car. He had this look in his eyes, a mixture of pity and fear that didn't belong on the face of a grown man with a badge. "Just read the manual, kid," he muttered, "and check under the mattress. The guy before you, old Miller, he left some notes. Some of them are useful." Before I could ask what happened to Miller, Holloway threw the Jeep into reverse, whipped it around, and tore back down the fire road, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. I was alone. The climb up the stairs was brutal, but the view from the catbird seat was worth it. 360 degrees of green ocean. To the west, the mountains were purple bruises against the sky. To the east, the dense, unending forest. I unpacked my meager life, a sleeping bag, a crate of canned chili, a few paperbacks, and a framed photo of a life I was trying to forget. The cabin smelled of pine sol and old tobacco. It was perfect. It wasn't until that evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon and turn the sky a blood orange, that I remembered Holloway's advice. Check under the mattress. I figured it was probably a stash of nudie magazines or a bottle of whiskey the previous guy had hidden from the supervisors. I lifted the stained, thin mattress of the cot. There was no whiskey. There was just a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper, folded into a tight square. I unfolded it. The handwriting was frantic, the pen pressing so hard into the paper that it had torn through in places. It wasn't a log of duties. It was a list. Rules for the night shift. Read immediately. 1. Keep the trap door locked from sunset to sunrise. No exceptions. Even if you left something on the catwalk, it stays there. 2. The radio is for official forestry business only. If you hear static on Channel 9 that sounds like a woman crying, turn the volume down. Do not speak to her. She is not lost. 3. There is no deer in Sector 4. If you see a deer standing on its hind legs in Sector 4, look away immediately. If you make eye contact, it knows you can see it. 4. Sometimes the wind will stop. I don't mean it slows down. I mean it cuts out completely. The trees stop swaying. The birds stop singing. If this happens, lay on the floor below the window line. Do not make a sound until the wind returns. 5. If you see a man in a yellow raincoat standing at the edge of the clearing, checking his watch, do not wave. He is waiting for your time to run out. 6. Do not open the hatch for Ranger Halloway after dark. Ranger Halloway goes home at 5 p.m. He does not work nights. I read the list twice. Then I laughed. A dry, nervous chuckle that sounded too loud in the glass box. Good one, Miller, I said aloud. Hazing the new guy. It was a classic prank. Scare the city boy with some campfire ghost stories so he spends his first week sleeping with one eye open. I crumpled the note and tossed it onto the desk. I wasn't going to fall for it. I was a rational man. I believed in taxes, gravity, and the fact that my ex-wife was never coming back. I didn't believe in bipedal deer or ghost frequencies. I spent the first 3 days settling in. The routine was hypnotic. Wake up, coffee, radio check-in, scan the horizon for smoke, read, eat, sleep. The silence was exactly what I needed. It cleaned out my head. I started to feel human again. The rules were forgotten, buried under a stack of topographical maps. But on the 4th night, the wind stopped. It was around 2 a.m. I was awake, reading a battered copy of a thriller novel by the light of a propane lantern. The wind had been howling all evening, rattling the window frames and whistling through the steel grating of the catwalk. It was a comforting white noise, a reminder that the world was still moving outside, and then, in the space of a single heartbeat, it vanished. The rattling stopped. The whistling died. It wasn't a gradual lull. It was like someone had hit a mute button on reality. The silence that followed wasn't the peaceful silence of the first day. It was heavy, pressurized. My ears popped. I froze, the book open in my lap. I looked at the lantern flame. It was perfectly still. I remembered rule number 4. If the wind stops, hide. Don't be an idiot, Jack, I whispered. It's just a pressure front. It's meteorology. I stood up to stretch my legs and walked to the window. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and looked down into the clearing below the tower. The moon was full, casting a stark silver light over the trees. Nothing was moving. Not a branch. Not a leaf. The forest looked like a photograph. Then I saw him. Standing right at the edge of the tree line where the shadows of the pines met the moonlight of the clearing was a figure. He was wearing a bright yellow raincoat. The hood was up, casting his face in shadow. He was just standing there, perfectly still, looking up at the tower. My breath hitched in my throat. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Rule number 5, the man in the yellow raincoat. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Hey, you! This is restricted government property." The figure didn't move. He didn't react to my voice. He just stood there. Slowly, mechanically, he raised his left arm and tapped the wrist, as if checking a watch. I backed away until my legs hit the cot. I sat down hard. It's a hiker, I told myself. It's just a lost hiker, or a poacher. But hikers didn't stand perfectly still in the middle of the night staring up at fire towers. And poachers didn't wear bright yellow raincoats. I scrambled for the radio handset. I needed to call Halloway. I needed to report a trespasser. I keyed the mic. "Base, this is Tower 4. Base, do you copy? I have a visual on an intruder in the clearing." Static. Thick, wet static. "Base, this is Tower 4. Over." The static shifted. It wasn't random noise anymore. It sounded like weeping. A low, jagged sobbing that cut through the speaker hiss. Rule number 2. If you hear static that sounds like a woman crying, turn the volume down. I dropped the handset like it was red hot. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth, the sobbing getting louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room. I reached out with a trembling hand and twisted the volume knob until it clicked off. The cabin returned to that heavy, suffocating silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor below the window line, clutching a flare gun I had found in the emergency kit. I waited for the wind. It took 3 hours. When the first gust finally shook the window pane, I nearly wept with relief. I pulled myself up and looked out. The clearing was empty. The man in the raincoat was gone. The next morning, the sun felt like a lie. It was too bright, too cheerful. I radioed Halloway at 0800 sharp. "Tower 4 to base. Morning check." "Base copies Tower 4. Halloway's gravelly voice replied. "Everything green up there?" I hesitated. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream that there was a lunatic in a yellow coat stalking me. But what if it was a test? What if Miller had cracked up and now they were waiting for me to do the same? Or worse, what if Halloway knew? "Green across the board," I lied. Quiet night. Copy that. Watch the western ridge today. Temps are rising. I spent the day pacing the small cabin, exhausted but wired on caffeine. I retrieved the crumbled note from the trash can and smoothed it out on the desk. I treated it like a Bible now. I memorized every word. Rule number 3. The deer in Sector 4. Sector 4 was the dense patch of forest directly north of the tower. It was the darkest part of the woods, a tangle of old-growth pine and underbrush that the sun rarely touched. I avoided looking at it all day. I focused my binoculars on the south, the east, the west, anywhere but north. But as evening approached, curiosity began to gnaw at me. It's a human defect. We have to look at the thing that scares us. We have to know. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the canopy. I picked up the binoculars and slowly, dreading every inch, panned them toward Sector 4. The trees were thick there, interlocking like fingers. I saw movement. A deer, a large buck, its antlers velvety and massive. It was grazing in a small patch of ferns. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Just a deer. Just a normal biological animal doing normal animal things. See? I whispered. You're losing it, Jack. It's just a deer. As if it heard me, the buck stopped grazing. It lifted its head, but it didn't look around for predators. It looked straight up, straight at the tower. Even from this distance, I could feel its gaze. Then it did something that made my stomach turn to ice. It stood up. It didn't rear up on its hind legs to reach a branch. It stood up fully, locking its knees, straightening its spine like a human being. Its front hooves hung limply at its sides like useless hands. It stood over 7 feet tall, an awkward, towering grotesque of biology. It wasn't balancing. It was standing, comfortable. I remembered the rule. Do not look at its eyes. I threw the binoculars onto the cot and squeezed my eyes shut. No, 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 I chanted, pressing my hands over my face. I backed away from the window, tripping over my boots and landing hard on the wooden floor. I stayed there, curled in a ball, until the sun was fully gone and the cabin was plunged into darkness. I didn't turn on the lantern that night. I didn't want to be a beacon. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind, praying it wouldn't stop again. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs, metal clanging on metal. Clang, clang, clang. It wasn't the frantic scurry of a raccoon or the heavy thud of a bear. It was the rhythmic, measured tread of boots. Someone was climbing the tower. I crawled to the trapdoor in the center of the floor. It was a heavy wooden hatch secured with a steel deadbolt. I checked the bolt. It was slid home, locked. Clang, clang, clang. The footsteps got louder. They reached the top platform, the metal catwalk that wrapped around my glass box. I held my breath. I could hear the person walking slowly around the perimeter of the cabin. I could hear the fabric of their clothes brushing against the glass. They were circling me, hunting me. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the door. A fist pounded on the wood. Bang, bang, bang. Jack, you in there? My blood ran cold. It was Holloway. Jack, open up. It's Holloway. My truck broke down on the fire road. I need to use the radio. I reached for the deadbolt. My hand hovered over the metal latch. It was Holloway. He needed help. I couldn't leave him out there in the cold. I gripped the bolt, ready to slide it back. Then I stopped. My eyes darted to the crumpled yellow paper on the desk, barely visible in the moonlight. Rule number 6. Ranger Holloway goes home at 5 p.m. He does not work nights. Jack, come on, buddy. It's freezing out here. Open the hatch. The voice was perfect. It had the gravel, the cadence, the slight impatience, but there was something wrong with it. It was too flat. There was no breath behind the words. It sounded like a recording being played back at high fidelity. I can't do that, Ranger, I said, my voice trembling. Protocol says no visitors after dark. Silence on the other side of the door. Protocol? The voice changed. It wasn't Holloway anymore. It shifted, sliding up an octave, becoming a high, mocking falsetto. Protocol? You think a piece of paper is going to save you, Jackie boy? I scrambled back from the hatch, grabbing the flare gun again. Open the door, Jack, the voice said, dropping down to a deep, guttural growl that vibrated the floorboards. We just want to look at you. We just want to see if your skin fits us. Something scratched at the wood. Long, slow scratches like nails dragging against a chalkboard. Screech! Go away, I screamed. I'm armed. You're not armed, the voice whispered, and now it sounded like me. It was my voice. You're just meat in a can. And we have a can opener. The handle of the trapdoor jiggled violently. The deadbolt rattled, straining against the wood. I aimed the flare gun at the hatch, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. Come in and I'll burn you, I yelled. The jiggling stopped. The footsteps resumed. They walked away from the door, around the catwalk to the window on the north side. I turned, pointing the gun at the glass. A face pressed against the window. It was Holloway. But it wasn't Holloway. The skin was too loose, hanging off the skull like wet dough. The eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely black. And the mouth. The mouth was open in a silent scream, stretching wider than a human jaw should allow, revealing rows of needle-thin, translucent teeth. The thing wearing Holloway's face tapped on the glass with a long, crooked finger. Tap, tap, tap. It smiled. Then, slowly, it began to lick the glass. I didn't fire. I wanted to. My finger tightened on the trigger of the flare gun until the plastic polymer creaked, but some primal instinct stayed my hand. If I fired through the glass, I would shatter the only barrier between me and the thing on the catwalk. The wind would rush in, and with it, the cold, and with the cold, it. So I just sat there, frozen, staring into the abyss of those black eyes while the creature dragged its tongue across the pane, leaving a smear of thick gray slime that froze instantly in the mountain air. It watched me for an hour. It didn't try to break the glass. It didn't speak again. It just observed, studying my fear the way a scientist studies a microbe under a slide. Then, as the first hint of gray dawn touched the eastern ridge, it simply stepped back, vaulted over the railing with impossible grace, and dropped silently into the darkness below. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. The isolation, which had felt like a gift just days ago, was now a cage. The tower wasn't a fortress, it was a dinner plate held up to the sky. I moved my cot into the center of the room, away from the windows. I hung blankets over the glass, taping them up with the duct tape from the emergency kit, trying to turn my fishbowl into a bunker. I lived by the light of the propane lantern, turning it down low to conserve fuel. Day 5 was a blur of caffeine and paranoia. I stuck to the radio schedule, but I kept my transmissions brief. Tower 4, all green. I didn't tell Holloway about the visitor. I was convinced that if I spoke about it, if I acknowledged it out loud to the outside world, it would become real in a way I couldn't take back. Or worse, the voice on the other end wouldn't be Holloway. The turning point came on the 6th night. The fog rolled in. It wasn't normal mist. It was a thick, supernatural soup that rose from the valley floor like rising water. It swallowed the tree line, then the base of the tower, and finally, it wrapped around the cabin itself. The world outside the glass ceased to exist. There was only gray, swirling nothingness. I was sitting on the floor eating cold beans from a can when the radio crackled to life. It wasn't the scheduled check-in time. It was 3:17 a.m. Click. Jack? The spoon fell from my hand, clattering loudly on the wooden floor. It wasn't Holloway. It wasn't the mimic. It was Sarah, my ex-wife. Jack, are you there? Please pick up. I'm cold. Her voice was perfect. It had that slight rasp she always had when she first woke up. It had the tremor of worry she used to get when I stayed out too late. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew logically it was impossible. Sarah was in Chicago. She was living with her sister. She didn't know radio frequencies. She didn't know I was here. Rule number 2. The radio is for official forestry business only. Do not speak to her. Jack, please. The voice sobbed. I drove up to find you. The car. It slid off the road. I can see the light of the tower. I'm hurt, Jack. My leg. I think it's broken. Please. I stared at the handset. The sobbing was gut-wrenching. It was the sound of the woman I had loved for 10 years. In pain, begging for me. It's a trick, I whispered, rocking back and forth. It's a trick. It's a trick. Why won't you answer me? Sarah's voice shifted. The desperation turned into anger. You always do this. You always shut me out. Open the door, Jack. Let me in. "You're not real," I screamed at the radio. "I am real," she shrieked, the audio peaking into distortion. "I'm more real than you. You're the ghost Jack. You're the one hiding in a box while the world rots." Then the static cut out. The silence returned. But not for long. From the fog below, I heard a sound that stopped my heart. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps on gravel. Not one set. Dozens. I crawled to the window and peeled back the corner of a blanket. The fog was illuminated by the faint moonlight, glowing a sickly white. In the clearing below, they were gathering. Figures. Hundreds of them. Some were wearing yellow raincoats. Some were wearing ranger uniforms. Some were naked, their skin pale and elongated. And scattered among them were the deer, standing upright, their front hooves hanging limp, their heads craned back to look up at me. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. And then I saw him. The man in the yellow raincoat, the one from the first night. He was standing at the base of the stairs. He raised his hand, pointed a finger at the tower, and then pointed at his wrist. He tapped it. Once, twice, 3 times. My time was up. The radio crackled again. This time it wasn't Sarah. It was a chorus. 1,000 voices overlaid on top of each other. Men, women, children, animals, all speaking in a chaotic, deafening unison. "Come down, come down, come down." Then the scratching started. Not on the trapdoor this time, on the roof. Heavy thuds slammed against the metal roofing. Something had climbed the girders, something big. The tin sheets groaned under the weight. I saw the ceiling boards bow inward. Dust and sawdust rained down onto my cot. Rule number 1, keep the trapdoor locked. The rule didn't say anything about the roof. A claw, a massive bone-white hook, punched through the ceiling. Then another. They ripped at the metal like it was wet cardboard. The screech of tearing steel drowned out the radio. I scrambled back, grabbing my pack and the flare gun. I had to move. I had to leave. The sanctuary had become a coffin. I looked at the trapdoor. If I opened it, I was breaking the rules. If I stayed, I was dead. Screw the rules! I spat. I slid the deadbolt back. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. I threw the hatch open and stared down into the darkness of the stairwell. It was empty. The fog swirled around the metal steps. I dropped through the hole, slamming the hatch shut above me, though I knew it wouldn't stop them. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The wind was howling again, whipping the fog into a frenzy. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, and began to descend. Clang, clang, clang. My boots rang out on the steel. I looked down. The clearing was a sea of shapes in the mist. As I descended, the sea parted. They were making a path for me. I didn't look at their faces. I remembered rule number 3. If you make eye contact, it knows you can see it. I kept my eyes on my boots. I focused on the rust on the stairs. I focused on the rhythm of my breathing. Halfway down, the tower shuddered. I looked up. The cabin at the top was being torn apart. A massive shape, shadowed in the fog, was perched on the roof, ripping the structure open. But it wasn't alone. Peering over the railing of the catwalk, looking down at me, was me. It was Jack, wearing my flannel shirt, wearing my face. The mimic smiled, a wide, impossible grin that split its face in half. It raised a flare gun, my flare gun, and pointed it at me. "Shift change," it called out. Its voice was my voice. I didn't wait. I jumped the last 5 steps, hitting the dirt hard. The impact jarred my teeth, but adrenaline masked the pain. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't run toward the fire road. Holloway had said the road was 4 hours of winding switchbacks. I wouldn't make it 10 yards. I ran into Sector 4. It was madness. It was suicide. Sector 4 was where the deer lived, but looking at the map, I knew it was the shortest route to the river, and the river led to the main highway. The forest was a nightmare. The trees loomed over me, their branches intertwining to block out the sky. The fog here was so thick I could barely see my hands in front of my face. I heard them behind me, the wet slapping of bare feet on mud, the clicking of hooves, the rustle of raincoats. They weren't running. They were herding me. Don't look back. Don't look back. I tore through the underbrush, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. My lungs burned. Every shadow looked like a man. Every tree stump looked like a crouching beast. Suddenly, I burst into a small clearing, and there, standing directly in my path, was the buck, the upright deer. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall. It blocked the trail. its chest heaving. It smelled of rot and musk. I skidded to a halt, raising the flare gun. I had one shot. The deer took a step toward me, its knees bent backward with a sickening crack. It opened its mouth, and instead of a bleat, it spoke. "Did you read the note, Jack?" It was Miller's voice, the previous ranger. "I read it," I screamed, my finger shaking on the trigger. "Then you know," the thing rasped. "You know you can't leave until the time runs out." It lunged. I pulled the trigger. Whoosh! The flare hit the creature dead in the chest. Magnesium ignited with a blinding red brilliance. The creature didn't scream. It shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and burning hair. It thrashed, the red light casting terrifying, strobe light shadows against the trees. The fire caught the dry pine needles instantly. A wall of flame erupted between me and the monster. I turned and ran. The heat was intense at my back, chasing me, pushing me. I ran until my legs gave out. I ran until the sun began to rise, burning away the fog. I ran until I hit the asphalt of the state highway. I collapsed on the center line, gasping, crying, bleeding. A truck horn blared. Brakes screeched. I looked up to see a logging truck jackknife to a halt just feet from my head. The driver jumped out, a tire iron in his hand, looking terrified. "Buddy, are you okay? Jesus, look at you." I grabbed the man's leg, smearing blood on his jeans. "The tower," I wheezed. "They took the tower." The driver looked at me with pity. "All right, easy now. Let's get you to a hospital. You're in shock." He helped me into the cab of the truck. It smelled of stale coffee and diesel. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. As we pulled away, I looked back at the forest. A plume of black smoke was rising from the direction of Blackwood Peak. I had burned it down. I had won. The hospital was bright, sterile, safe. The doctors told me I had suffered a breakdown, acute psychosis induced by isolation. They said I had started a forest fire in a delusion. They said Holloway, the real Holloway, had found the tower empty, the door torn off the hinges, my gear destroyed. They kept me for observation for 3 days. On the last day, a nurse came in. She was a kind woman, older, with a soft smile. "You have a visitor, Jack," she said. "A Ranger Holloway. He says he needs to close out your file." I sat up. "Holloway, is he angry about the fire?" "He didn't seem angry," she said. "He brought you your things. He said they found your bag in the woods." She placed my duffel bag on the bed. "Send him in," I said, taking a deep breath. I needed to apologize. I needed to explain. The nurse nodded and left the room. I unzipped the bag. I wanted to see if my photo was still there, if my life was still there. My hand brushed against something paper. I pulled it out. It was the yellow legal pad note, the rules. I frowned. I had left this on the desk in the tower. How did it get in my bag? I unfolded it. The handwriting was different. It wasn't Miller's frantic scrawl anymore. It was neat, precise. It was my handwriting. I read the new list. Rules for the patient. Read immediately 1. Do not trust the nurses. They are just the gardeners. 2. The medicine makes you forget the faces. Do not take the blue pill. 3. Ranger Holloway died in 1998. If a man claiming to be Holloway visits you, check his teeth. If they are translucent, pretend to be asleep. A chill went down my spine that froze the marrow of my bones. The door handle turned. "Jack," Holloway's voice came from the hallway. "Can I come in, kid?" It was the gravelly voice. The perfect voice. I looked at the door. There was a small observation window. Holloway was standing there. He was smiling. He opened his mouth to speak to the nurse in the hall. The fluorescent light of the hospital corridor hit his teeth. They weren't white. They were clear, like glass. And behind them, inside his throat, something was moving. I looked back at the note. 4. You never left Sector 4. The hospital is just another cage. We wanted to see if you would feel safe. 5. Look out the window. I slowly turned my head toward the 4th floor window of the hospital room. Outside, hovering in the air, level with the glass, was a face. It was the deer. It tapped a hoof against the window. Tap, tap, tap. The door to my room opened. Holloway stepped in. "Time to go back to work, Jack," he said. The wind outside the hospital stopped. The end. The shift is over. For now. If you enjoyed the terror, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next nightmare. Good night.